Um, Good afternoon. I am Manavendranath Bera, a member of Breakthrough Science Society, and I shall be conducting this webinar organized by Breakthrough Science Society All India Committee today. And the topic of the seminar, the webinar, we have already announced, and that is protecting Himalayan environment. So, in the winter land of Leh Ladakh, a place celebrated for its tranquil beauty and rich culture, climate change casts a foreboding shadow of its future. This high altitude desert, characterized by its stark landscapes and extreme climate, now faces the visible and alarming manifestations of ecological disaster. The land is habited by a population of which 97% are coming from indigenous tribal communities, living there for centuries in sustainable and peaceful ways, and are now staging protests for months against ecological disaster in the name of development. Staring at the impending ecological disaster looming over the Himalayan region, they are now fearing of losing their livelihood, culture, and customs. Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, an engineer and education reformer from Ladakh, is known for his innovative approaches to education and sustainable development in the region, along with Ladakh's apex body, is leading this movement. Mr. Sonam Wangchuk staged a 21-day-long climate fast at an altitude of 3,500 meters above the sea level in sub-zero temperatures, seeking to bring autonomy to Ladakh and highlight the damage to the Himalayan region's fragile ecology and glacier by industrialization, which ended on 26th of March. 26th of March, tens of thousands of Ladakhi people participated in this movement. In continuation, the protesting Ladakhi people announced a border march of 10,000 Ladakhi shepherds and farmers, known as Pashmina March, on 7th of April, that is today. With utter disregard for the concern raised by the Ladakhi people and their democratic rights to stage protests, the administration of the Union Territory imposed Section 144, barring these people from gathering without permission. While the border march is called off, the movement still continues. The Breakthrough Science Society, a voluntary science organization dedicated for the cause of science and society in India, fully supports this movement and has issued a statement expressing its solidarity on 23rd of March, 2024. Here I read out the statement. Just give me a moment. Can you see my screen? So here is the statement issued on 23rd March by Breakthrough Science Society. The Breakthrough Science Society, abbreviated as BSS, expresses its solidarity with Sonam Wangchuk as he continues his climate fast, entering its 18th day today at Leh in Ladakh. His fast is a resolute and non-violent protest aimed at creating both public awareness and to get the government to respond to the urgent threat of climate change and other critical issues affecting the region. Sonam Wangchuk, well-known scientist, innovator, educationist, environmentalist, and Max SA awardee in 2018, has embarked on his course of action as his native region of Ladakh, with its fragile ecosystem, stands particularly vulnerable to the adverse impact of climate change. The consequences of rising temperature, notably the rapid retreat of glaciers, pose imminent risk to critical water sources essential for the region's survival. Beyond the immediate concerns of climate change, Wangchuk's protest also calls for constitutional safeguards to protect Ladakh's distinct environment and indigenous heritage from the encroachments of the corporate interest. The BSS recognizes his protest as a wake-up call to our collective sense of responsibility to safeguard our planet. Climate change is no longer a distant prospect, but an imminent threat, as witnessed more and more in extreme weather patterns, rising sea levels, and escalating global temperatures. The situation calls for urgent response on the part of all stakeholders. The BSS urges governments and policymakers to enact and strictly implement effective environmental regulations, increase investments in renewable energy sources, and carry out awareness campaign to educate people about sustainable practices needed to mitigate the impacts of climate change. At such a critical juncture, collective action is the need of the hour. The BSS stands with him in appealing to everyone to join in raising awareness, demanding action, and unitedly resolving to confront the challenges of climate change and forge a path to a more sustainable and hopeful future. At the same time, it is important to consciously adopt environment-friendly practices in our daily lives. More to the point, we call upon the government to engage immediately with Sonam Wangchuk and the protesters, to listen to their legitimate demands and see that their concerns about their environment and the well-being of the Ladakhi people are genuinely addressed and not sacrificed at the altar of so-called industrial development and investments for profit. So this is what was the statement issued by Breakthrough Science Society. Today, we are organizing this seminar to extend our continued support and to stand by this movement against climate catastrophe and environmental degradation in the Himalayan region. With this, now I invite Professor Dhrubajyoti, who is an eminent geologist of the country, an INSA fellow scientist, and also the national president of Breakthrough Science Society, to discuss in support of the statement of Breakthrough Science Society expressing its solidarity with the people's struggle in Ladakh. Professor Dhrubajyoti, so please start the discussion. So before I hand over, I request everyone to write your questions on the chat box. We will gather these questions, and if time permits, we will also discuss upon them. Okay, so thank you. Professor Dhrubajyoti.
Thank you, Madhavendra, for giving me this opportunity to address such a involved group of participants. You have heard about the fight that the people of Ladakh are waging under the leadership of Sonam Wangchuk. They are fighting for their democratic rights, to save their livelihood and their land, and to protect the environment, which is under attack from global warming and climate change. Now, there are two aspects to their struggle. One is, of course, political, and the other is related to environment and climate change. Though the two are closely intertwined. Politically,
Professor Dhrubajyoti Mukherjee, we cannot hear you.
Not
hear me
audible.
now?
Yes, please.
Shall I repeat what I said? Or
For last
just-
30 seconds, yes.
okay. So there are two aspects of this struggle, political and related to climate change and environment. Though there is close relationship between the two, and the two are very closely intertwined. Politically, the people of Ladakh want statehood and autonomy so that they themselves can decide on issues which are important to their life and livelihood. It was a promise from the BJP before the 2019 election that the rights of the indigenous people of Ladakh would be safeguarded through inclusion of Ladakh in the 6th schedule of the Constitution. But after coming to power, they have backtracked on their promise, and after years of dilly-dallying, they have finally announced on March 4th, I think, last, that Ladakh will not be included in the 6th schedule. So now, as the situation stands, the Ladakhis cannot exercise their democratic rights. Ladakh is now ruled virtually like a colony by a commissioner or a deputy governor appointed by the central government at Delhi. And he has no direct knowledge or relation or empathy for Ladakh and its problems. So as a result, the mountains and valleys and the unique ecosystem of Ladakh is sold to the corporate houses for unrestrained plunder. Sonam Wangchuk says that the Ladakhis want back their democratic rights and demand the implementation of 6th schedule for Ladakh. Ladakh, as you know, is a cold desert. The terrain is inhospitable, isolated from the rest of the world. The struggle for existence is hard. There is very little natural resources, and the people have to live by subsistence farming on tiny agricultural lands and by livestock raising in the pasture lands. Generations of Ladakhis have lived on this land, maintaining harmony with nature. They have built a unique lifestyle, finely adapted to the environment, and created their own characteristic cultural domain. Now they are apprehensive that the new dispensation may destroy the land and the life and the finely tuned ecosystem, and along with it, their own lifestyle and culture. The attack is coming on two fronts. Firstly, there is the Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You can
Which
hear.
button?
So, and they are worried that their land is progressively being handed over to the corporates for their maximum profit. So this is one aspect of the attack. The other is the environment is under attack from global warming. The fine balance that exists in the ecosystem is disturbed by climate change. We can give an example of this fine-tuning that exists in the environment. You know, snow leopards is a common wildlife in Ladakh. It's a characteristic of Ladakh. And this number of snow leopards control the number of wild goats and sheep on whom a large section of Ladakhi people depend. If the number of snow leopards increase, the number of goats and sheep would decrease. It's expected. This would alleviate the problem of overgrazing of the land. So that's a good thing. And in the pasture land, there will be less of overgrazing. And this in turn would promote regeneration of plants on the slopes, which again would prevent soil erosion and lessen the possibility of flash floods. So this disaster of flash floods is directly linked to the number of snow leopards. If the snow leopards increases, then it is good for the environment. If the number of snow leopards decrease, that will lead to overgrazing and soil erosion and destruction of the land. Himalayas, as you know, is a young mountain range formed by the collision of the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate. The collision started about 40 million years ago, but the movement is still continuing, and the Indian plate is going down under the Tibetan plate at the rate of 4 to 5 centimeters per year. And as a result of this downgoing Indian plate below the Tibetan plate, the Himalayas, the height of the Himalayas is increasing steadily at a rate of about 5 to 10 millimeters per year. These results have been measured and verified by geologists and geophysicists. Secondly, a major part of the rocks that make up the Himalayan mountains are sedimentary rocks or metamorphic rocks like phyllites and schists, which are not very strong. The slopes are steep, and moreover, this is a region of high rainfall, which facilitates sliding of the rock masses. Thus, because of the combination of all these different factors, active movement related to mountain building, the weakness of the rocks, constituent rocks, the rainfall, very steep slope, etc., these combination of these different factors make the Himalayan ecosystem extremely fragile, and the environmental balance is easily disturbed, which leads to natural disasters. Hence, Himalayas are very prone to natural disasters. Among the natural disasters which affected the whole of India during the last 100 years, 35% of them are in the Himalayas alone. So roughly about more than 1/3 of the natural disasters in India stem from the Himalayas. And such disasters include earthquakes, landslides, flash floods, glacial lake burst outs, snow avalanche, etc. Climate change has exacerbated the problems, and it has really led to a climate emergency, which Madhavendra has already mentioned. Global warming is leading to increased melting of the glaciers. This leads to depletion of the water resources and scarcity of water for drinking and irrigation, because there is less water from the melting of the glaciers because the glaciers are decreasing. The water precipitation, on the other hand, this is about the permanent snow and ice that is on the land. Then there is a yearly precipitation in the form of rain in the summer and snow in the winter. The winter precipitation, which replenishes the glaciers, have decreased as a result of climate change. So the glaciers are not being replenished. Summer rainfall, on the contrary, has become very erratic, also as a result of climate change. In some years, there is excessive rainfall. In other years, there is almost a drought-like situation. And as a result of climate change, extreme climate events like excessive rainfall, cloudbursts, etc., avalanches, they have become more common. I am not going into the details of the effects of climate change. That is can be discussed in another talk. And in Ladakh, in a general way, we can say, as a result of this change in climate, in recent years, the occurrence of flash floods have increased. I can mention only a few of these very well-known natural disasters which have affected Ladakh. In 2010, a cloudburst just for a day in Leh gave rise to devastating flash floods, which killed more than 200 people in Leh itself. And thousands of houses were simply washed away. And in 2014, a glacial lake, because of the warming, it burst out of its boundary and it washed away the whole village called Gia. In 2015, the rainfall was very high throughout the year, and it was almost twice as much as in the other years. So as a result, the occurrences of flash floods increased in many different parts of Ladakh. Natural disasters, which are a result of this fragile ecosystem and exacerbated by the climate change, such natural disasters are compounded by the problems created by an explosion of tourism during the last 20-30 years. Population of Ladakh was about 2.75 to 3.0 lakhs. So it was a very sparsely populated country. Tourism has put an enormous human burden on this land. In 2023, the number of tourists was 6 to 7 lakhs, almost twice the population of Ladakh. And to cater to such a huge number of tourists, the necessary infrastructure has to be built, roads have to be built, and buildings have to be built, hotels and guest houses have to be built to accommodate the tourists. And where from would this land come? This land would come at the cost of agricultural land and pasture land. So at Leh, I'll just give you an indication of how much is the construction boom that has taken place. At Leh, just a few years back, there were about 200 hotels. And now it has jumped to nearly 1,000 hotels. This is just standard hotels, in addition to the guest houses and homestays, etc. So this loss of agricultural land is adversely affecting their food security. And in the future, food security will emerge as a problem. And the same with the pasture land. The pasture lands are also being gradually eaten away under the pressure of construction and under another attack, apparently to meet the threat of climate change, that is solar panels. So huge solar panels are being built at the cost of the pasture lands to meet the demand of electricity for the tourists and the indigenous people. So this is also this loss of land as a result of this present dispensation is a cause of great worry for the Ladakhi people, and it is adversely affecting the ecosystem. It is also affecting the water supply. Earlier, the source of water for the indigenous people of Ladakh was mainly meltwater and springs. Due to construction boom, half of the springs have been blocked, and the half of the, almost more than half of the natural streams, they are blocked up to make way for the construction. So not only the surface water supply has very much declined, and the natural flow blockage of the drainage is also indirectly leading to more and more water-induced landslides in Ladakh. So now the Ladakh, to meet the burgeoning demand of water, the Ladakhis have to, the corporates particularly, have to depend primarily on the groundwater. So there is a very large extraction, large-scale extraction of groundwater to meet the tourist influx, demands of the tourist influx. And the water table as a result is coming down, and the water crisis is already started to appear, and it will become more in the coming days. And I have also already mentioned that this blockage of the natural drainage is making the land more and more susceptible to landslides and flash floods. I mentioned already about the loss of pasture lands, which is not in the cities, but in the countryside. And in the countryside also, they are losing the pasture land as a result of building of roads, also for the army in the border, and for the construction of solar panels. So about 40,000 acres of prime pasture lands have been lost to the corporates for installation of solar panels. This is adversely affecting the livelihood of the Ladakhi people. On top of this, there is a phenomenal increase of vehicles. And as you know, vehicles lead to vehicular pollution. So the pristine air of Ladakh, which was so much appreciated by the tourists earlier, is gradually becoming more and more polluted as a result of the high vehicular traffic. And also, this air pollution is also destroying the biodiversity in the region because it is adversely affecting the organisms in the ecosystem. Finally, an enormous problem which has arisen is of waste management. It is also directly a result of the explosive growth of tourism. The traditional Ladakh society was nearly a zero waste society. almost whole of the waste was recycled. The human excreta was composted in dry toilets, which saved water and also produced fertilizers for their agriculture. And the other types of organic waste from kitchen, etc., they were also recycled. So there was very little waste dumping in the traditional Ladakhi society. And it was a clean environment. With the advent of tourism, mountains of garbage is being produced now. And especially the problem is of the plastic waste due to the tourists. At Leh itself, 50,000 bottles of plastics are used every day. Just think, 50,000 bottles of plastic are thrown into the environment every day to a pristine landscape which had no pollution earlier, which had no waste dumping earlier. And every day, 15 to 16 tons of solid waste are produced. And most of this solid waste, which includes a large proportion of plastics, is dumped in open cast landfills just in the outskirts of the town. And they are called bomb guards. These very unsightly landfill in the outskirts of Leh are called bomb guard, and they are set on fire. So the fire that is set on fire, that is coming from the waste dumps in the outskirts of the city, it is producing toxic fumes, which is polluting the area, and the smoke wafts to the glaciers and accelerates the melting of the glaciers. So it cuts in both ways. It pollutes the air, it gives rise to larger rate of melting of the glaciers, adversely affecting the source of the water. Only last year, a waste management plant was installed at Leh, but it remains to be seen whether the plant is capable of tackling the huge amount of garbage or waste that is produced daily by the tourists. Recently, there is another menace has cropped up. Recently, uranium and lithium have been reported in Ladakh. And as expected, the corporates' greed is on the rise, and the government also wants to hand over the exploration and mining of these precious materials to private houses, to corporate houses. And we know that the private mining owners are notorious for destroying the landscape. Just go through the Raniganj and Jhoria coalfield and see how indiscriminate mining has turned that land into a wasteland. So this mining, if it is given to the top corporates entirely, there will be very little environmental safeguards, and the government's new environmental laws that are being framed, they are very friendly to the corporates and not friendly towards protecting the environment. I am not going into the details of that. So this is what attack is taking place in the physical side. But attack is also taking place on the culture of the people of Ladakh. The Ladakhi society was primarily an agricultural society, a pastoral society. And it was very finely tuned to the environment and it was living, the people were living in harmony with the environment. Now that society is now transitioning to a society heavily dependent on the tourism with its corporate culture and high influx of the corporate culture. And you know the corporate culture, how it has got many negative aspects associated with that culture. I need not go into the details of the bad things about the corporate culture. So this is how Ladakh is under attack from cultural side, from environmental side, and from political side. So being pushed to the wall, Sonam Wangchuk and his dedicated followers have started this fight, and they had planned for a meeting, border march today, but the government is already down on them, and it has banned the march by promulgating 144, section 144, and they have also reduced the internet speed of internet. It is now only a 2G internet available there. So the government is on the warpath against the Ladakhi people. And we must stand in solidarity with the Ladakhi people, give them strength, and protest against these wrong policies of the central government. Now, Ladakh is not the only Himalayan region whose ecosystem is under threat. The Ladakhi people themselves have witnessed the disastrous consequences of the so-called development in neighboring Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal, Meghalaya, and other Himalayan terrains. And they are determined that unless they are vigilant, similar disasters will grip Ladakh also. Ladakh is now not as bad as these countries, as these provinces, but they are afraid that the way things are proceeding, Ladakh will become just like that. And hence this movement. I have already mentioned that the Himalayan ecosystem is a very fragile ecosystem. Humans have been living in the mountainous regions for many, many years. But the population was small, the communication was difficult, and they were isolated from the rest of the world. Very few people used to visit these kind of places, and they lived in harmony with nature, and their lifestyles were integrated with nature. And their lifestyle were such that it was, they were living in the environment and using the environment for their livelihood. Like most of their settlements were either on the plateaus or on the small or big flat patches of land. Buildings were never built on the slopes of the mountains. This is a new phenomenon. The slopes were protected by forests, and the indigenous people, they derived their sustenance from the forests, and they also protected for the forests, which provided a protective cover for the land so that the soil erosion is checked and these landslides are also checked. So the natural disasters were there, but they were not man-made disasters like they are now. The problem started with the British era, with the commercial exploitation of forests and other natural resources of the hill regions. under the British rule. So there was improved communication, systems were set up, the populations, people migrated with the improved communication system, and the forests were exploited, and population started to increase, and attacks started on the fragile ecosystem, and it became with time more and more severe. Forests and the hill slopes were cut down and transformed into agricultural land, and boom on construction activity. Even on the slopes, made it a disaster-prone area. Natural drainage was blocked, and landslides were very common on the hill slopes, and recurring flash floods became common. But till the early part of the 20th century or middle part of the 20th century, there was some restraint, and things were not somewhat under check. But during the last 50 years or so, there has been, the situation has become extremely bad, with unbridled construction activity and explosive influx of tourists. And the tourists brought in their wake the other consequences, which I have already mentioned. In the science of environment, there is a concept of scientific concept of carrying capacity of land. Now, this carrying capacity of land means how many people can live on a terrain without totally destroying the environment and creating problems for the ecosystem. For the Himalayan tourist and pilgrimage sites, the carrying capacity has already vastly exceeded than the critical value. So the landslides, subsidence, flash floods, inundations have become a common occurrence. I'm not going into details of that. I'll just mention a few disasters and their reasons. On top of these environmental problems, there is an added problem that Himalayas is a zone of high seismic hazard. Earthquakes, several earthquakes in recent years have caused crippling devastations in the Himalayan mountain chain. Because it is a young mountain chain, it is actively being deformed, and active deformation means that it is earthquakes generated by the deformation itself. So it is an earthquake-prone area, and all the other environmental hazards, earthquake is an additional hazard in the Himalayan terrain. So among the recent earthquakes which has devastated the Himalayan region, say last 20, 30 years, in 1991, there was the Uttarkashi earthquake. In 1999, there was the Chamoli earthquake. In 2005, there was the Kashmir earthquake, which affected Kashmir and the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir also. And in 2015 is the mega earthquake in Nepal, which not only devastated Nepal, but it also caused problems in the Indian part of the Himalayas also. So we must, whenever we build constructions, build roads, or build dams, the seismic hazard must be taken into account, which is not always being done or sometimes glossed over. So under pressure of the people's movement, the government has been forced to enact some regulatory measures. But the implementation of these regulations is miserable. There are building codes are specified, but right under the eyes of the administration, multi-storied buildings are being constructed on the fragile slopes, on steep slopes, defying all building codes. So regulations have to be framed, and they have to be, the government must see to it that they are strictly implemented, and the corporates cannot bypass the regulations by different types of subterfuges. The sad thing is, at places, the government is itself promoting projects which pose threats to the environment. And the few such important projects which are not friendly to the environment, you know about the Peri Dam project, how it inundated a vast tract of land, and Sundarlal Mohguna spent his whole life and gave up his life fighting against this Peri Dam project. Now, a big unrestricted dam construction is going on in Arunachal area, and the latest very reprehensible project is the Char Dham project. And 4-lane highways are being constructed on landslip prone slopes with almost, and the road cuts are at places almost vertical. The stable slope is about 10, 20 degree, 30 degree. That is if the slope is 20 to 30 degrees, that slope is generally stable. And unless there are some triggering effects, landslides will not take place. But some road cuts, they are almost vertical ones. They're extremely prone to landslide. And this, so tunnel collapse, and they are building tunnels, and this use of heavy machinery, they are blasting, the vibrations, they are also triggering landslides. You know about how the tunnel collapsed on the Char Dham project, and the miners were were trapped for about 16 days. So about the disasters you have read in the newspapers, I just mentioned a few only, which are really landmark disasters. In 2013, there was the Kedarnath disaster, which produced devastating floods, not only in Kedarnath, but through a large area in downstream. And thousands of people died and properties destroyed. And this started from the bursting of a glacial lake upstream of Kedarnath, in the upper side of Kedarnath. Then in 2021, a bursting of a glacial lake in the upper reaches, this produced a huge landslide and a cascading stream of water. The Rishigonga, the entire Rishigonga project, the dams were completely washed out. The power stations were completely demolished. That is also a very disastrous occurrence in the Almora Himalayas, Garhwal Himalayas. And in 2023, in Sikkim, the South Lonan Lake burst out, and the whole of Tista 3 Dam was destroyed in minutes. So if such disaster happens, and if an earthquake happens on top of that, you can easily imagine what devastations will be caused not only in the hills, but also in the plains in the downstream areas. Finally, we say that let us not be misunderstood that we are against development in the hills. We are for the development of the hills, but the development must be sustainable, must take into account the ecological problem aspects, and the strict measures are to be adopted so that the regulations are followed. Now, what happens in our country is that after a disaster, a commission is set up to look after the disaster. It studies, makes a whole lot of recommendations, and all these recommendations are buried in the files. I'll just mention just one example about Kedarnath disaster. After the Kedarnath disaster, the Supreme Court set up an expert panel to ensure that such disasters do not happen. So the expert panel, it probed into the causes and made several recommendations. I am mentioning only one of the recommendations. There are other recommendations about building dams, interference with the river courses, etc. I'm not going into that. Just one recommendation I am mentioning. The panel recommended to limit the number of visitors to the 4 pilgrimages. So it recommended that the Kedarnath should have only 5,000 visitors per day, Badrinath 6,000 per day, Gangotri 4,000 per day, Yamunotri 3,500 per day. But the government buried that recommendation in the file, and to promote more and more people travel to Kedarnath and Badrinath, they took up the Char Dham project. So we are merely waiting for a mega disaster in future. So, and the problem is not for Ladakh alone, the problem is for the entire Himalayan range, and by extension, whatever happens in the Himalayas, it will have serious repercussions on flooding, on water resources, on agricultural production in the downstream areas also. So it is in our interest of the civilization that the environment is protected and we build up a vibrant movement for the protection of Himalayan environment, including that in Ladakh. Ladakh is at the threshold now today. It is on the way to a disaster. There is still time to prevent it. And where in the other parts of the Himalayas, a lot of harm has already been done, and our movement should be to restore what was to ameliorate some of the harms which has already been done to the countryside. So development with protection of the ecosystem should be our goal. Thank you very much for patiently hearing to me.
Thank you, Professor Dhrubajyoti Mukherjee, for very detailed account of the situation that we are seeing today in Ladakh and how people are concerned about what is going to happen to them in future. So now we shall have a question and answer session. So I have received a few questions on the chat box. So obviously for the others who wants to have some question, please write them on the chat box. We'll, as time permit, we will consider them one by one. So one question is coming from Pritam. Pritam, can you please unmute yourself and tell the question? Pritam Sharma.
Hello, Professor Dhrubajyoti. Very nice talk. Thank you for the talk. My question is regarding the lithium deposits in Ladakh. It is said that if we have to escape the trap of hydrocarbon, we must shift to clean energy. And this lithium is one of the key aspects of this clean energy shift. But again, mining this lithium will cause environmental damage within Ladakh. So how do we escape this proverbial Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, regarding how we escape the hydrocarbon trap into clean energy? But even using clean energy, we are polluting the environment.
I have already just hinted that we are not against mining activity, but mining should be that the corporate houses, the government is giving over the mining rights to private owners. The private owners, their past record is notorious. They just dig and make the ground waste. This must not be allowed to happen. After the mining, the ground has to be regenerated. So whatever mining activities are taken up, compensatory forestation, and after the mine closure, the regeneration of the land must be enforced. This is what the environmental movement should demand. It is not, we are not demanding that no lithium mining. Lithium we need to get to come out of the fossil fuel economy, to transition to the solar economy. For that we need the lithium batteries. So lithium is needed, and that lithium is a component for transitioning to a green economy. So lithium mining must be done. The only thing is the profit of the corporates will be slightly less. They have to invest more for the environmental regeneration. And that the owners don't want to do. The government should force the owners to do this. This is our view.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pritam, as well. Our next question is by Mr. Ganeshan MP. So if you are in the audience, can you please unmute yourself and place the question, Mr. Ganeshan?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Please go ahead.
Sir. Yes, in this our statement, we have given that we are urging the government to go for large-scale RE sources, investment in large-scale RE sources. In this case, in our Ladakh, actually that is the issue, because as a cold desert, it is the highest capacity utilization factor. So in India, we can get the highest yield from that area. So the government proposed through Solar Energy Corporation of India of about 25,000 megawatts of project. So it requires 1 lakh acres of land. So all the Pashmina land is going to be destroyed, and it is going to be looted. That is the main issue raised by Sonam Wangchuk. So in our statement, we have to make some clarity in it, saying that we are urging the government to go for distributed energy sources, not like this one. Another example is in Rajasthan, the same dry desert where the solar projects were installed. So in that one, mainly the Great Indian Bustard, Chinkara, Indian Desert Park, these are all got affected, and people from Rajasthan, from Jaisalmer, they formed a yatra, Orang Bado Yatra, and they fought with the court and everything, not in a big, it has not given more attraction for the people's movement, so it could not be defeated. So there also the Great Indian Bustards are getting destroyed. That is one aspect.
Sure. Mr. Ganeshan,
So
take your question. Can you please phrase the question in few words or something?
That's why I'm saying that in our statement, we have to say that urging the government to go for large-scale investments in RE sources. That one is to be slightly clarified.
I see. I see.
So,
Yes.
sorry, large scale what?
in our statement, we told that we are insisting that to go for large scale RE investment in RE sources, in renewable energy sources. That means it is coinciding with the government's present proposition of 25,000 megawatt in Ladakh. So it should be modified as.
Can you share that statement?
Yes.
Our statement, you mean, right?
Yes, because Mr. Ganeshan is referring to our statement.
Correct. Just give me a moment. Yes. Can you see it?
Yes.
Please? Anyway, so I think this is a particular comment rather than a question, I believe. Maybe there are some people who are waiting to have some questions and listen from the speaker. So maybe I move to them and then come back to this if time permits. Is that okay, Mr. Ganeshan?
Sure. No issue. Yes, we can proceed.
Professor Mukherjee, can we move to the next question?
Yes, sure.
Okay, thank you. So we have one question coming from actually two participants from the audience actually asked the same question, that why they have organized march to the border. The second person also asked this question, saying that why then Sonam Wangchuk is going to China border for the march.
I think this was very clear from what Sonam Wangchuk said in his that small video clip where he expressed his philosophy. He said that the Ladakhis are losing their land. In the south, they are losing their land to the corporate houses for construction and energy requirements. And on the north, they are losing their land to the Chinese who are occupying the parts of Ladakh. So they are marching from border to border that give back the land to the Ladakhis. That was the reason for this border-to-border march.
Okay.
Both the borders, they have lost their land and they want to regain that in a non-violent way. They made that very clearly. In a non-violent way, they want to do that through.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. I hope the question by Yadur Mahabala, Mr. Yadur Mahabala is addressed, right? Can you please
Yes,
say?
correct.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, actually, I don't agree with it actually. Chinese are occupying Ladakh land. I have studied the whole Indo-China border disputes in several centuries, its history and all that. Actually, LOAC is being violated by the Indian side. This is a political.
Okay, it's a different discussion altogether.
It's a different discussion altogether.
Altogether.
What I mentioned is what the Ladakhis feel. The pasture land people, they feel their pasture land is being lost either to this in the south to the corporates coming from Indian mainland and to the north from the Chinese coming from the other side of the border.
No, Chinese have not come. It's only in one point.
It's a completely different discussion.
It's a different discussion.
What we are saying is what the Ladakhis are feeling. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I will go to the next question, and there is one question coming from Mr. Devesh. Mr. Devesh, are you on the audience, and can you please unmute yourself and place the question? It seems I don't see him, so let me read on behalf of him. So the question is that this sounds so horrible. This might sound like a silly question, but it does not seem like there is another way, at least in today's scenario. And that is there any way to eradicate the corporate sectors and tourists from Ladakh? Professor Dhrubajyoti.
Is there any way to eradicate
the corporate sectors and tourists from Ladakh?
I mentioned about the carrying capacity of the land. So the tourists in Ladakh have to be limited after a scientific study of the carrying capacity of a particular sector of Ladakh. One thing. Second is that all the waste disposals, that problem and the water problem, some good scientific answers must be obtained. There must be scientific studies must be undertaken to solve this problem of waste disposal and the water supply. So you cannot stop the tourists from coming, but you can limit their numbers depending upon the carrying capacity of the land, and you can scientifically tackle the problems which are coming from the activity of the tourists, like plastic, disposal of plastics, disposal of waste, etc.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mukhopadhyay. So we are going towards the end in a sense, like two more questions we have, although they are related. And these questions are to think about what we can do in future. So one question is coming from Mr. Anil Savant. Mr. Anil Savant, are you there on the audience?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
As the situation is today, government has taken steps to isolate the Ladakhi people and pressurize them. In such situation, how can other citizens of India can support their struggle? This is the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anil Savant. There is also another related question coming from Kriti Mukherjee. It seems she is not there on the audience. And the question goes like this, that I totally agree until we think about sustainability and no development can develop the country. Okay, so her question is that what should be our role as a normal citizen of India to protect environment and support this environmental movement or climate movement? And Professor Mukhopadhyay, I would like to add another point to this particular question so that you can address, and with that we will end the program. That is, so this climate change issue is obviously this impending climate catastrophe looming over the horizon already we see, right? So the situation is not just what we see in the Himalayan region, but also in the other parts of India. For example, in the coastal regions, even in the middle of India, which is experiencing droughts or heavy rains unusually. And also we see there are a lot of deforestations happening, let's say in Hasdeo or Bakswaha, in this particular region, denying the tribal rights for their forest and their sustainable living style or livelihood. So it obviously requires that as a common citizen, we should think about some collective action. And that is what possibly these two participants questioned about, that how we can participate, what should be our role, and on top of that, how Breakthrough Science Society can effectively engage itself to develop a movement against climate catastrophe and environmental degradation. Professor Mukherjee, please.
Yes. The only way these things can be done is by organizing the people. Organizing the people and putting pressure on the government to all the things that I have already discussed. So Breakthrough Science Society should take up programs of creating awareness among the people about the danger to the environment and how the profit motive of the corporate houses, how it is affecting the environment, and how we should ask the government to put pressure to the government to frame laws for protecting the environment and approach all political parties that environment should be a prime agenda of their program, which is not, environment has not entered into the political arena in India yet. Whereas in many other developed countries, environment has become a political issue. There are green parties. which fight on the environmental issue. Whereas in India, environment has not yet become a part of the political agenda. So, number one, make the people conscious about the danger to the environment through programs like this convention that we have, webinar that we are doing. We can have programs at the grassroots levels, in mohallas, in villages, depending upon the strength of the organization. We should spread the message throughout the country about the environment, number one. Organize movements demanding that the government do the necessary things. And third, appeal to the political parties to make the environment a part of their agenda, a manifesto, part of their manifesto.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee. So essentially, we understood that our first step would be to make public aware of the looming danger of climate catastrophe and environmental degradation. And obviously, Breakthrough Science Society is continuously making efforts so that more and more people become conscious about this climate crisis. At the same time, you also know that every year we participate in India March for Science, and there is one of the agenda or one of the demand we have is essentially to come up with a policy that protects our climate and environment. So I think more and more in number, if we can participate, we make others participate and could develop a movement in a concrete sense, we would be able to participate or let's say support the movements, ongoing movements, however small or big it may be, like one is going in Ladakh, we would be able to, in a concrete sense, support them. So I think with this ending note and the appeal that all of you please be concerned about the seriousness of the situation and make people aware of this situation and more participate in these kind of movements. We end
This webinar is one such program, to make people aware of this. So there should be hundreds of programs like that.
Like that, yes. So with this appeal and note, we end our program today. And before ending, once again, I would like to thank our National President, Professor Dhrubajyoti Mukherjee, all of you who had actively participated in this webinar, and the people who have placed the question to make this discussion interactive. So with this and with the support we express towards the movement led by Sonam Wangchuk in Ladakh, we end our program today. Thank you very much.